let's move on to the item at hand. So we have some staff recommendations. Do we have any? Dave?
Look, I'm happy to put on the table to move the option 1 that we
Okay, do I have a seconder? Seconded Tim. Okay, any questions? We have staff at the table. Andrew?
My understanding, I've got 3 questions. One of them relates to process and the other 2 relate to New Brighton and issues that we just heard in the deputation, in fact. My understanding was that given the 2 options, there was going to be some further advice on those options from staff once we had heard from the submitters and had an opportunity to consider everything that we'd read and heard.
So what was intended was that staff would make a recommendation either on 1 or 2. That's we've been gazumped on that, so you've got the motion in front of you now. But for what it would have been worth, there wasn't anything that I heard there that would say that we needed to change option 1, and staff would have recommended option 1 there.
So staff would have recommended option 1 regardless of the fact that it's now been moved?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
And there would be nothing specifically that I heard from the deputations would have changed any of those recommendations.
Right, thank you. And now 2 questions relating to New Brighton, and there may be questions that you can answer or there may be questions that need to be answered by representatives of DCL. One of the issues raised in what we've just heard was the car parking issue in Beresford, on the Beresford Street land, the 3 car parks. Clause 6.13 in the report refers to the fact that DCL will engage with businesses and obviously is actively considering what the right quantum and location of car parking in the New Brighton area looks like as part of its overall regeneration plan or redevelopment plan for New Brighton. I'm just keen to know, and maybe to give a level of comfort to the submitter, that engagement would include the Union Street Health Centre, Work and Income, the Backpackers and the Grace Vineyard Church, as has been referred to in the written and verbal submissions, and I'm guessing would incorporate other potentially affected businesses as well, so that all of those businesses that were expressed as businesses that might be affected will have an opportunity on behalf of those businesses and obviously on behalf of their customers, you would imagine, in as much as they would have an interest in their customers being able to easily access their businesses, they will be well consulted with throughout any engagement process that DCL run.
Yeah, we're having a wider car parking study undertaken at the moment. We've already had some preliminary discussion, particularly with Dr. John Cook at the Medical Centre, who has a particular interest in parking. There is proposals for Beresford Street for the road reconfiguration to add additional parking in there also.
Yeah, so given that parking is on your radar, that leads to another question. Presumably, and I went through the report to have a look, I don't see anything that answers this question. If I missed something, I apologise. Presumably these 3 car parks, given the underlying zoning of the land, are there on what was always anticipated to be a temporary basis anyway?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you.
Phil?
Thanks for your report. Just a couple of questions. First of all, around Beresford Street in New Brighton, do we know what the current flooding risk is of that in terms of future development, that Beresford Street area?
Yeah, so that area is below the 19.3 metre Canterbury Ordnance Datum height as set out in the Optimal District Plan, so any development there would need to address that.
Thanks. And my other question really is just in relation to the information that the submitters from Peterborough Village have just given us in terms of their discussions with DCL, and that they've referred really clearly that for permeability, as they called it, that the preferred height of development in the Peterborough area be 3 or 4 stories. So I just wonder if you would comment on what they submitted today, please.
There are a number of groups who have a view on what height should be. That would be largely directed by a financial feasibility study by the developer, and that's been worked through at the moment.
So should it only be financial? Should not urban design also be taken into account, Rob?
Urban design most certainly should be taken into account, but if a feasibility doesn't stack up commercially, then you won't get a builder to build.
So part of urban design, presumably too, would include that concept of permeability.
Yes.
In terms of the report in front of you today, councillors, you really have got, I suppose, two options on those matters. One, as the report is written, it is assuming that all those matters are left to the regulatory process, the resource consent process, to resolve. But you do have the option, because you are the landowner now, that you may choose to look at some controls in your response that addresses those. So you have got those options and can certainly consider that a different approach.
Thanks, Bruce.
Vicky?
Just to you, Bruce, in terms of the, this is the first time we've had any public input on the use of the Peterborough land, and I thought the presentation from David and co was fantastic in terms of opening up that land, creating a space. But they were talking about a permitted height of 3 to 4, a desirable height that opened that up of about 3 to 4 stories. Can you tell me the permitted height in the area, so that if we did leave it to the resource consent people, what would be allowed in that space?
Yep. What I might do is call on Sean Ward, to one of our urban planners, to come and answer that. He's going to be much more up to date with the detail than I am.
Thank you.
Yeah, the permitted height on that site in that zone, which is Central City mixed use, is 17 metres. So about 4 levels probably.
About 4 levels.
Yeah.
So,
and beyond that, you would need resource consent to go higher.
right. So it would be reasonable, given that that's the permitted height, for us to limit it to that sort of height.
I'm sorry, could you ask me that again?
So the permitted height in this,
Yes.
in the plan,
Yep.
is about 4 levels, which is what they were seeking.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's great. And the permeability and the feel of it, it's a mixed use.
It is a mixed use zone, so
Right.
and that anticipates a wide range of different activity types.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
great. And the other question, in terms of us transferring this for the purposes of having it developed, is there a mechanism, if it wasn't developed within a certain period of time, where we could transfer it back?
Yeah. So those mechanisms can be developed and put into sale and purchase agreements. We would need to say and draw to your attention that would impact on DCL's ability to go to the market with those. It may act as a deterrent for potential purchasers. It may have impacts on their lending as well. But certainly the mechanism, the possibility of using that mechanism does exist.
Sure. So can I just be clear? Our rationale for transferring this as a council to DCL is so that we get positive social, environmental and community outcomes, rather than DCL has positive financial outcomes?
I believe that's the reasons that council has set up DCL, and to achieve that quadruple bottom line, yes.
And it is in the statement of intent that we just approved yesterday. Any other questions? Yannick?
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about the next step of the process if the land is transferred, and just picking up on the concerns that Vicky's raised around how we get good urban design. So you've said that we could rely on the resource consent process. I think some of us will be quite concerned. We've had experience of that. I mean, Eastgate is a really good example, where it's very hard for the community outcomes to actually overweigh or come up with a higher weighting than the economic arguments that the developers put forward, and so we often see quite not as good results. With the land that we own as a city, obviously we've got a unique situation where we can get that higher level of urban design. So if the transfer is approved today, and I just wanted you to take me through each of them. So Peterborough Quarter, what's the next step in terms of signing off on that? What's going to go there, and what's the opportunity for us as elected members, if any, to have any other say on that?
So, subject to there being no additional changes or you don't change the recommendation, as the recommendation is written, the next step would be to undertake a preliminary site investigation of Beresford Street, or all three sites, to see the level of land contamination there. And we would anticipate that for 2 of the 3 sites, that would then allow us to formulate a recommendation to Chief Executive to establish a price, and that price then would be negotiated and a sale and purchase agreement put in place. It would be a bit more difficult with the Milton Street site, we fully anticipate. I've cleaned up a couple of depot sites and been peripherally involved in another couple. That will take a little longer knowing depot sites. So those would be the key things. But I suppose the crux of really your question is the second part. In terms of the decision before you, we have, I suppose, made the recommendation on the basis that we understand that Council has set up DCL to undertake these activities on its behalf and at arm's length. You do have the option, as I said to Councillor Clearwater before, of putting some further controls on that through changes to the recommendation, and that is your right and your responsibility if you believe that's needed. But it'll be worthwhile considering that goes against that objective of really trying to set up DCL to run this independently. So that's really a policy matter that Council will need to consider in its deliberations today.
So, what I'm trying to, if you take Peterborough, for example, my understanding is that a development agreement's going to be prepared and come back to Council for sign-off?
If you approve this today, it wouldn't come back to Council for sign-off.
Right, which is different than what's in the statement of intent.
Yeah, I'm not so sure on the statement of intent.
The statement of intent for this year has it coming back to Council. The statement of intent prepared for next financial year is not specific.
So which one are we working on? Next year's.
We've got one that's approved at the moment, and the other one's not yet approved.
I thought this was passed.
I mean, it's kind of irrelevant whether it's in the the current statement of intent and the proposed one that hasn't been signed off. It's almost irrelevant in terms of the question which I'm asking, which is the development agreement going to come back to us as Council to sign off before it's signed? And is that the opportunity that we get to deal with the concerns that the community have raised around what's been proposed in terms of things like height and amenity?
The danger of getting into debate territory, what I would perhaps suggest a consideration of changing that question to, do you want that to come back? And then
So we did, you were in this meeting yesterday, we did sign up a statement of intent, and that is in a statement of intent when it comes to Council for approval, and that's what DCL would be actually.
Right. It's been changed. No, but it's been changed in the new one for 2017-18 that there is no requirement for it to come back to us. And so I just think it would be really good to get that clear about what was happening. But it's really...
No, we got that clear yesterday. It is coming back.
So it is... Right. And so is that the time we address the amenity concerns? Or do we put them in here, is what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, look, this is new territory in the way we operate. And I recall at a meeting either late last year when we updated, we've already entered an agreement with approval of Council with a preferred developer who's expending significant money on developing plans that we have briefed you on to date. To go down a certain track and then fundamentally change those will be commercially challenging.
questions?
Comfort, and I'm casting my mind back, when you showed us, Rob, the plans that you had, or some sort of a draft that you had come up with, that, would you say that they're incredibly dissimilar to what the gentleman just showed us before?
Yes.
Very dissimilar. I recall they had some laneway type things and
Yeah, they have laneways
They're
in what
similar.
is proposed.
a similar concept that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Mike?
Thanks. In 8.7 of the report, it talks about an increase to rates of 0.18, but then in the resolution at H, it talks about, says there's going to be no impact on rates. Could you just confirm that H is correct and there will be no impact?
So the wording in the resolution refers to council giving guidance to officers that if that's what you want to achieve, then we need to find a way of dealing with that 0.818% increase. So we're trying to get the principles and you get your guidance up front, and then once we understand that, then work out and negotiate how we can achieve that.
So that impact will be for this upcoming financial year?
For this upcoming financial year.
Which means if we don't want the 0.18, we'd have to look at cutting other things from the current budget?
There's a number of suggestions in the report on how we can do that. It's whether because we're constantly looking for savings. It's whether some of those savings are used, so it pushes more pressure on us. It's whether we work jointly with DCL to look at how we can reduce the impacts. There are a number of different options. What we are asking for and seeking your guidance, what do you want to achieve, and then we'll get on and achieve it. So once you resolve that, that's what we have to do.
Okay.
So the easiest way of achieving that would be for the rent on the Milton Street depot to, as the proposal originally went out, come to the council, not DCL.
So the original proposal doesn't say that. It does indicate that there is a rates impact, but certainly the easiest way of achieving no impact on rates is for the rental to stay with council and not go to DCL.
So if the rent stayed with the council on that Milton Street depot, then the 0.18% doesn't happen.
So that's 0.15% of that. There are still some financing costs as well, which is 0.04%, and they don't add up because there's some rounding between the 0.15 and 0.04.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so I have a motion.
I have some amendments. The first is that, so that we're totally clear, that the rent on the Milton Street depot remain with the council.
That's not what we put in here.
You would put it in.
The impact otherwise, as I understand it, because this is not budgeted into the annual plan, would be a rates rise of not 5.5 but of 5.65. Yeah? Which has not been consulted on, and I'm not keen to take it anywhere near above 5.5.
So what is the actual amendment that you're moving?
That the rent on the Milton Street depot site remain with the council for the, I think it's 2 years that it's...
Duration
for the duration
of a tenancy.
Okay.
I have some other ones, but they relate to Peterborough. This doesn't affect any capital transfer, it just affects the operational rent on the site, which is currently planned to come to the council. Do you want the notice of the other ones, or do you want them after we've dealt with this one?
So this... I just get them all up, Vicky.
Vicky, just put them all up.
Okay.
We can deal with them separately if needed.
Ref, can I also signal that I also have an amendment around the Milton Street site, which Tim and I have discussed with staff. I'd like to go up to, please.
And there's one going up about Peterborough as well.
If I may, through the chair, just draw attention, Councillor Buck. If the rent covers the revenue, but there are some costs as well. We pay rates on that site and insurance on that site. As written, I'm interpreting that those would go to DCL and the revenue stay through. So maybe it would be useful to talk about the net rental rather than just the rental, so that we can address that aspect.
Yep, that's fine. Yep. I'm just aware that in 2.3 it says DCL proposes that this income remains with the council. This is Peterborough.
Okay, so
Yeah. Is it readable?
Chris, was that right, the net rental?
Yeah, that's fine.
The net rent.
Vicky, why are you not just proposing to not transfer it?
What, the land? I'm happy if you want to move that by way of a further amendment, but we had agreed on these, but in the proposal, the rental came to the council. This is a changed proposal. Yeah. And this directly impacts on everybody's rates.
I'm with you.
I understand.
I understand.
So, through the chair, just invite perhaps Councillor Buck, if you're happy to use revenue rather than rent, that's strictly more accurate.
Totally fine, Bruce.
This is putting covenants on this land. I mean, that's... Well...
Did you find it? It's just the proposal that's wrong, isn't it?
That's the report that's coming down.
One minute. What paper?
Page 207.
I'm reading from 2.3 on page 207. DCL proposes that this income remains with the council.
Second one, it's clear, it's transferred, it would mean left to register income.
Hey, Ray. I've just got a further one there on the Beresford Street car park.
Should we have a recess and get them done with up here in a minute?
The only way that we can...
Just have a recess and people can get their amendments up and then we can get them ordered and structured.
Am I allowed to walk forward to
Clear about what we're going to
go
go
around the
on.
side? So, we need to put them in calendar. That could be would you? Well, you know what it means when we transfer them.
Yeah, so take a 5-minute break and we'll come back when everyone's written their amendments.
Does that stuff you up?
And Ian, you might need to just check over the legal covenant aspect.
Yeah, but because when it comes through, Silky has the rates and the insurance and everything, and the rentals, we split out the costs from the water. So we all use the rental and some of the insurance. Yeah.
Just so you don't have to find 600,000. Well, something interesting.
That's why it's rental revenue and we're all really clear.
So it has really constrained everything design. No, like
I'll just put the height.
Is that what you want? You want it, I don't think you need it.
Okay.
Limited. There we go. We're on.
We on? Okay, we're back.
We're back.
We're back.
Just need to check. There's some that don't have seconders.
Well, we'll
Yeah,
deal
lovely.
with that.
So we'll highlight them one by one.
Okay, everyone. Everyone's put their amendments in. We'll take them one by one. So, what was that? We haven't got yours in. Pauline.
Reading them out as you go through because it's hard to see.
Andrew.
And just to clarify, given that there are matters in these amendments that we hadn't previously considered, can we put any questions on the amendments as we go through each one?
Yep.
So you'll put them. So we'll deal with each one individually,
separately, yes.
questions, and then we'll go through that process with each one. Great,
First
thank you.
amendment, moved by Mike, is that the net revenue on the Milton Street site remain with council for the duration of the lease. Do we have a seconder for that? Seconded Sarah. Sorry? You've already seconded.
It's the same one.
Okay, fantastic. Right, any questions on that, Andrew?
Does this amendment not just confirm what's already in the report in section 2.3, referring to current rental income, and in resolution point 1H, we shan't do anything that impacts on rates?
So the 2.3 on 207 is some attachments from the original report that started the process of the council. So it's not advice that we're giving you today. As it talks about in the main part of the report, and you'll be in the financial section, that was the position that was put to council with the first report, that since then that DCL have come back to council advised that they require that rental to address the holding and development costs on the land. Might get Rob just to talk a bit about those development costs and what the impact will be if they don't have their rental and aren't able to address them. But coming back to your question, what is in the original recommendation is just about giving the principles to officers, and then the officers would go away and work to achieve those principles. It wasn't intended that that would mean specifically, although that is one of the solutions, that the rental stays with council.
And if this amendment carries today, if this is passed, then obviously there's no impact on rates through this transaction. If this amendment is not carried today, what's the impact on rates in next year's annual plan?
If you give us the guidance that you don't want any impact, we will need to find a way of making sure that there was no impact. We believe that that will be possible. We need to look at savings. We'll need to be looking at working with DCL to achieve this in different ways. But it's a challenge that we would be prepared to accept.
So when you say look at savings, you mean look at savings in other projects to provide headroom for this?
Yes, across the budget in my area, but potentially across the whole of the corporate services area. So the general manager and myself have looked at seeing, are there some options that we can find there?
So we would essentially cut something else to subsidise this?
Or savings, real cost savings, if because we're constantly looking for those.
Right, okay. And a question for Rob, if I can. If this passes this afternoon, and noting that Bruce has indicated you'll probably make some comment on this anyway, what would be the impact on the project, and what other sources of funds would DCL look to cover any gaps that this left for you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So this is fundamentally about the capitalisation of your urban development authority, and that's what this process has been all along, and equally around the regeneration of our city. The impact to us to withhold the rental over the land that we would ultimately own if you were to pass it is we need to ensure we can cover costs for rates, for insurance, security, management and master planning of the site to take to market. So although there may be an impact as discussed around rates for the next financial year, the longer term position could be a positive one if there is an upturn on the development. So it's potentially, we're looking at, and you start looking at net costs, we're talking about a fairly small amount of money in the greater scheme of the entirety of the annual plan over the long term. But there are other options, and the other options to DCL are borrowing. So that's about the line of credit paper through the holding company, and but that relies on us having tradable security. So there are implications around the amount of land, its valuation, what encumbrances it may or may not have. So there are restrictions that our board, through our own internal policy and CCHL, will place on that line of borrowing. But again, ultimately we are owned by you, so we would be borrowing money to fund development, or we will simply end up in a situation where we won't be able to afford to progress the development to take to market.
Okay, 2 questions. When it talks of the duration of the lease, am I correct in thinking that the rental period is effectively a periodic, so City Care could leave literally next month? And 2, have I read this, that the intention of this amendment fundamentally renders DCL a property manager with 0% commission?
So the answer to the first is yes, as I understand it's currently a month-to-month lease. However, I think the broad intent, the agreed intent, is that we put in place arrangements that allow City Care to stay there on the site until at least 2019.
Okay.
And as just an aside, it would be perhaps useful for the proposed amendment to detail the City Care lease, just for the sake of complete accuracy. In the second statement, I think that's pretty correct.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Mike, to say the City Care lease? Jimmy?
I would like to follow into the first question again, okay? You mean that if council today we approve amendment 1, but based on the option 1 recommendation, the H paragraph, this is part of the H, the paragraph, or that's additional. If we approve this one, then also we adopt the option 1, this assumption, whether the rates will be the additional reduction, or just up to the 5.5% compliant with the annual plan. This is my question.
So if this amendment is approved, it effectively replaces H, and you need to remove H from it. And again, if this is approved, there's no impact on the rates. It stays at the amount that council's going to decide on the annual plan. So there'll be no impact on rates if you approve Amendment 1.
Okay. But if we are not approved, but you still commit yourself, you will approve the option 1.
If you don't,
still insure with the DCL to the rates is not over the 5.5.
Yeah. So it's effectively, if Amendment 1 is lost and H stays in place, it puts the challenge and the responsibility back on officers to meet your direction, which is our role, to make this work without an impact on rates.
Okay, thank you.
Dion?
How long's the rental on Peterborough Street for?
There's no rent.
That's not what we're talking about at the moment.
Well, there's a little bit of rent that comes from 3M in the existing building there.
And how long is that secured for?
Just getting what's this mean? The rent on Peterborough Street.
Is it in the attachment there? Those, the attachments with the properties on. I can't remember off the top of my head. There it goes, it'll be in there somewhere.
So it's a term, this information is in attachment A to the report. So the ground floor for 3M is for a lease that commenced on the 1st of February 2017 for a term of 1 year with a 6-month termination clause.
And am I right in that's about 70-something thousand a year?
71,000.
And will that have any impact on rates?
So that's been incorporated into the net figure to come up with the 0.15%.
Okay.
That one's almost cost neutral in terms of cost and revenue. It's pretty similar.
And the cost is that on the what is the cost associated with that?
I don't have those figures there. But
I think from memory it was a figure of about 65,000 versus the 75,000 income.
Okay, thank you.
Pretty close.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Yanni.
Yeah, just wondering that in terms of the Milton Street site and the duration of the lease, like, you know, currently we're looking at how we can make City Care perform better. That's what we've said publicly. So I'm just trying to understand whether or not, why we would, whether we have anything related to the lease around that, given that we haven't had that information back yet, and until we get information back, how do we know what we want to do in terms of the lease?
We've liaised with that particular company and they are keen to move off the site.
But we haven't, like, as a council, we haven't been briefed. We don't know what, you know, we're obviously waiting for that work to conclude.
Yanni, that's not relevant to the question, which is simply whether the revenue stays with council or not.
No, well, so it says for the duration of the City Care lease. So in terms of the timing of the lease, I was just trying to understand whether we should actually tie this into that future, whatever.
They can move whenever they want. They're on a periodic lease.
Okay.
Okay, any more questions? Right, so we have the amendment. I'll put that amendment. All in favour say aye.
Is there no debate?
You want debate?
Yes.
It's just for the amendment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is on the revenue.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's important. I don't like the idea of giving staff the direction to go away and cut the budget, having spent the last few months going through knowing everything that we need. I think it's important that we know what we're doing and what we're not doing. We've put a cap on rates of 5.5%. I don't want to go above that cap. We've gone out to the public on that basis. This puts rates at 5.65 or a change in something else that we've advertised as a level of service. We haven't consulted the public on this possibility at all because the attachment that went out, the proposal that went out, the rent was coming to us. So we pay DCL $3 million a year in operational costs. We then look at the capital costs of a range of other things. We're now looking at the transfer of about $17 million worth of land, which capitalises the balance sheet and a line of credit through CCHL. I think this operational income, which was always proposed to stay with the council, could and should stay with the council.
Okay. Can I just make one comment to that?
No. Thank you, Yanni.
So, yeah, I mean, I agree with that. This amendment, you know, if you think about it, we spent hours and hours and hours just discussing spending $500,000 with our community boards across the city on community projects. This is more than that, and we've had, you know, very little conversation about what misses out and what the consequence is. So, you know, I think we should support this amendment, and I do think, you know, that we've heard that there's other ways in which this funding could be realised by DCL. So, yeah, I'm very supportive of it. I also think that, you know, the duration of the City Care lease is an issue, but I appreciate you've said it, you don't think it's relevant for this point. But I just think in terms of working out the future of what's happening, then it is actually relevant. And until we do that, we shouldn't be giving away the rental.
Andrew?
Thank you. Yeah, I do agree with this amendment. I am concerned that H would see us essentially subsidising this loss of income by taking from a different project. Maybe the timing is unfortunate, given that the level of rates rise that we're going to be deciding on in a couple of weeks is top of the mind. But yeah, we've heard that there are other ways that this project can be made to work without the rental income, and I think that's the way that it needs to go. So yeah, this amendment I will be supporting on the basis that the effect on rates, particularly at this time, is something that we wouldn't want to see.
Jamie?
Yeah, I'll keep this pretty quick then. I'm committed to the 5.5% rates as well. I think that's very important, but this isn't going to be make or break necessary for that. There can be other methods of achieving it. I think what is also paramount is that DCL are able to do what they've set them up to do, and I think this is all part of a bigger picture about perhaps undermining whether or not, in my view, and other people may not share this view, but whether or not we back them, and I do, and I don't want to continually put up hurdles for them. And I actually think that there's no guarantees around this site anyway. We've heard that it's on a periodic rental, so they could quite literally up and go, the tenants, within the next month, literally. And finally to that, DCL is much more, in my view, than a property manager, and at least property managers get paid. So having them as a charitable property manager for 0% commission, I just think is a nonsense, so I won't support this. And I'm committed to 5.5% rates.
Thank you. Jimmy?
Because I support this one. Main reason is I ask staff, if we are not support this one, staff can follow the age, to work together with DCL to ensure this one. The problem is to give the staff the more kind of pressure, I think probably we keep this one at least can ease the staff, the pressure to have a discussion with the DCL, try to ensure these rates not increased and over the 5.5%. So that's the main reason I support this one.
Okay. Everyone done? Okay, I will put the motion. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against?
No.
That's carried. Do you want those to be recorded? Just put your hands up. Okay. So we have Aaron, Dion, Jamie and David. Thank you. Sorry? Everyone else against 5.
11.
Last 4. Okay, so we have the next amendment. Moved by Vicky that the council, in regard to the Peterborough Street site, in order to achieve positive social, community, environmental outcomes, is clear in its transfer that the development agreements stipulate that the height of the buildings not exceed what is permitted in the district plan for the site, that the development provide high amenity value, good scale and permeability. Do I have a seconder for that? Seconded Pauline? No? You've already moved an amendment, so apparently you can't. Anybody else?
Everybody already moved one.
Yeah. Well,
so if you've moved one, you can't second one either?
no. Okay.
No.
Okay, well I don't have a seconder, so that
Could I just
fails for
let
the
you
lack
know
of a
what
seconder.
you've just allowed?
No, hold on. You can't, no. So, is that correct here?
So what's the rule?
You can second that.
Correct that Vicky can't move another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if someone else that, if there's someone else.
They need a seconder.
But there's no seconder.
So I'm happy to second that.
But Yanni's moved an amendment.
You've moved an amendment, so you can't second it.
Well, is that the rule?
Yeah. Okay, so that fails for lack of a seconder. I'll move on to the next amendment.
Hang on, so you're just looking it up.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. We'll move on to the next amendment. Okay, this is moved by Phil. Request Development Christchurch Limited working with council staff and other relevant stakeholders to consider including the social housing sites on Barnard Avenue and the relocation of the park on Milton Street, which is the small park at the corner of Milton and Johnson Streets, not Sydenham Park, in the design of the future housing development on the Milton Street property with the aim of improving social housing outcomes on the sites and enhancing community and social benefits for the neighbourhood and wider community. Noting that should there be benefits, then the decision on whether or not the social housing sites and parks should be included will be referred back to council to make. The amendment has been seconded by Anne. Sorry? Oh,
Yeah.
I just read it out. Okay, it has been seconded by Anne, so any questions?
Not a question, but I'll just speak to it really.
No questions?
So,
Debate?
no questions? Look, just to put this in context, and I'm hoping the earlier amendment actually can be worked too, the one that Vicky has moved.
Yeah,
because this
Pauline's
is
going to second it.
Good. So, look, Tim and I will speak to it, I'm sure, but Sydenham actually is really got great potential to benefit from the DCL development. There's no question of that. And it's just how we do it, and also that we have the different parts joined up. So just to the south of the line, the north side of the line on the map, you've got Barnard Ave, and along Barnard Ave is some of the oldest housing, social housing in our city. And it seems to me a great opportunity to actually incorporate that development or include it alongside the other development. It doesn't mean that, and they would stay separate sites, but it seems to me there's great potential there in terms of economies of scale and how in fact developments are done, that we can, alongside some hopefully affordable housing, that we also redevelop our social housing in that area. And I think it's in the report that in fact there's a great thing being near the park is that the various sports clubs who use it, they also want to see the whole development really. They want the area looking nice, and it's a great opportunity to actually have an inclusive, re-energised community. So that's why I've moved this.
Thank you, Phil. Andrew?
Yeah, given the work that DCL are proposing in this area, and given that there is a benefit for greater at least social outcomes and possibly other outcomes from the potential inclusion of these additional areas, it seems crazy that we wouldn't include at least consideration of that, which is exactly what this this amendment is proposing. So I see no reason why we wouldn't support it. I'm in favour.
Okay. Tim?
Thank you. And like I've mentioned it before, I mean, Sydenham's been kind of treated quite hard in a lot of ways. If you look at the Brougham Street development, I mean, who would put social housing on a 4-lane highway? We did. Who would close a local school, which is very important to an incredibly strong community? Well, the government did. But we now have a chance to put some really good value into this community. To have a connection to Sydenham Park, which we are doing up at the moment, would be fantastic. I know some presenters before mentioned, questioned the value of affordable homes, but I think if you get a combination of what DCL is proposing or looking at here with regards to social housing, affordable housing and more upmarket housing, I think it's absolutely fantastic to have that cross-section in such a valuable site. And what makes it valuable is that connection to Sydenham Park, and I can't see how anyone could kind of question that at all. To have young families and affordable housing, social housing connected to those clubs that are connected to the park would be absolutely outstanding, and I hope you'll support this. Thank you.
Okay, Dave.
Look, whilst I support this admirable notion, we are here today to consider proposed property transfers and effectively the capitalisation of DCL. We seem to be digressing into management issues, and there seems to be a continual attempt to try and micromanage everything that DCL does. We're here to deal with property transfers, and whilst this is great, it can be brought to DCL's attention, but I don't really see it as absolutely necessary to be tagged on to a motion where we are considering property transfers to capitalise DCL. We're getting into detail. We're micromanaging. The idea up there is great, but I don't think it's part of the bigger scheme of what we're trying to achieve today. I think we're just going off on horrible tangents all the time. Let's get on with it. approve the capitalisation property transfers, let DCL get on with what we've agreed to set them up to do. We seem to be wanting to hang on to the purse strings, micromanage every goddamn thing they do.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, well, I'll put that motion. All in favour say aye. Oh.
Well, it should, because look, honestly, we're just considering this, we're asking them to consider it, and it isn't nuts and bolts. There's a whole strategic and policy area here, that's all. Isn't there? Well, there just was.
We're having fun, aren't we, today? Okay, I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Right, so should we go back to this number 2? So what's the story, Ian, on that?
So Pauline's going to second it, and she's going to withdraw her.
And that's okay?
Or somebody else is going to.
So somebody's going to do it, okay. Right, so we do have a seconder, Councillor Cotter. Any questions on this? Andrew?
From a legal viewpoint, can we do this?
Depends on how we dealt with it, how Raf dealt with it at the beginning. I understood he just moved on without saying that the amendment had lapsed for.
Oh no, I'm not meaning from I don't mean from a council procedural viewpoint. Can we deal with it? I mean from a legal property transaction legality. Can we deal with it?
I think that's a question I think Mr. O'Connor should be answering.
Okay. Absolutely. The council has, well, there are two aspects to this. The council as landowner and the council as regulator. Both are separate and independent processes of each other. The council as landowner has a contract or an ability to require the purchaser contractually to agree to whatever. So this is perfectly acceptable. Of course, the purchaser also, the landowner, would also need to comply with the city plan requirements. So there's no legal impediment to this. I must say the only way we could deliver this, though, is by registering an encumbrance against the title to the property. And I suspect that it would be appropriate if you asked DCL whether that would impact on their proposals and plans for the property.
So that was a perfect lead into my next question, which is, given that we now know this would require an encumbrance on the land, what would the likely effect be on the developer, and does it in fact risk the whole project if we were to place this encumbrance on the land by way of passing this resolution this afternoon? So that's the first question. And then the second question is a planning question around what the likely notification requirements would be in a resource consenting environment when a consent needed to be applied for to go to above the district plan height limits. But the first question, I'm guessing for Rob, is what the effect on the developer, the development would be, and whether this actually constitutes a risk to the whole concept.
It absolutely would consist a risk to the project. We've entered a good faith memorandum of understanding with the developer after a public process that was gone through. Their planning you're aware of and has been dealt with in PX sessions. So this would most definitely afford a risk to the project, and I suspect the current arrangement would fall through as a result, and then there would be issues with the market to going forward, I suspect.
So just to clarify, people voting in favour of this amendment this afternoon need to be aware that that may mean the whole Peterborough Quarter development may not proceed as planned.
Absolutely, and with a private developer through a good faith agreement who has expended significant money to date.
And presumably significant reputational risk around DCL's ability or council's ability to deal in good faith with other developers moving forward.
Correct, and I also think it would be at odds to the work we've been doing with the Investor Ready strategy to improve confidence of the city that Christchurch is a city that people wish to do business in.
Thank you. And then just the planning question, if I can, as well.
So I might bring Sean up for that.
So your question was about notification and what a likely outcome might be?
Yeah, if the proposal were to go higher than the height limit allowed by the district plan,
yes.
What the likely notification status of any resource consent application would be. And I mean, there may be different levels of breach of those plan requirements that would lead to different outcomes there, and maybe if you could comment on that as well.
Yep, sure. The first one is, if it were only height that was a breach of the plan standards, then an application for that couldn't be notified, except possibly under special circumstances. So the height is breach of height is a restricted discretionary activity in that zone, and they specifically not able to be notified, either limited or public.
So it couldn't be notified?
No, unless a decision were made that there were special circumstances requiring its notification.
Jamie, then Mike.
It was a good segue from Andrew's first question there. Going back to the fundamental basics of this, if this were to pass, this amendment, would we be marketably eroding the tangible value of this site the moment this resolution was passed?
Yes.
That would be pretty smart then, eh?
Mike?
Thank you. I just want to check from, I guess, where Andrew's going right at the very start, which this amendment, the fact that we failed to get a second to right at the very start, will it actually stand up if we do pass this now?
Because I think I did hear Ref say that at the beginning, and there's a video record. Just one second. Yeah.
I just want to make sure before we put this.
Yeah,
well, we didn't actually get a second to right at the very start. We just want to make sure that if we do put this through, that it will stand up.
Yep, I think it will be fine. So you finished? Any other questions? Vicky?
On the height restriction, can I just be very clear? So beyond 4 stories, if somebody wants to go up to 8, 10, 12, the fact that it's just an increase in height means that it cannot be notified.
Yes.
So
there may be other provisions that get breached that would open that up.
But it's just an increase in height.
Yes.
The local neighbourhood associations, all of them, no person who was concerned about the shading of the town hall, nobody could have an input unless we actually provide for some means of limiting the height at this stage.
We couldn't. There's no limited notification, which means individual parties, and no public notification of that height breach.
Unbelievable.
But that's for any site under the city plan rules.
Sorry?
But that would apply to any site, not just...
Any site in that zone, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. And does it have to go through the urban design panel?
It doesn't have to, but we would certainly, advise, and it has been, and we'll go again. Yeah. Any proposal of a site of that scale, we'd be advising to take it through the panel, yes.
Yeah. Mike?
Sorry, I might have missed it, but I didn't hear the answer to my question.
Ian was going to answer that question.
We would treat this as a foreshadowed amendment, and therefore it can be put and passed.
Aaron?
Yeah, so if this is put now and passes, does that then stay on that title even if this current development doesn't go through, or does it only apply to these developers? Would be my first question.
It would stay on the title and apply until the council removed it.
Okay, so any other developer coming in, and do we know then how much that changes the potential value of the land by? I don't know if we can use numbers, but we can use percentages.
We can't provide that advice on what dollars or percentage on that, so we don't know.
Yeah, any encumbrance obviously has an impact on the value. Yanni?
My understanding from the submission that we heard on this is that this information around the scale, the heights, was provided to DCL in June last year. Is that correct? There was a meeting around the community outcomes, and I was just trying to understand.
Just to clarify, because I heard it live
come to the table first, please.
Just to clarify the discussion, because I heard that element at live stream, I was somewhat surprised to hear that I'd invited the group to actually make a submission on what the design would look like. We had a meeting which we called with the Peterborough Village through Di Lucas to say, for your information, as interested parties, we have a preferred purchaser of the site, and that the process will go through looks like this. We did say we're interested in your views. I was then subsequently called to a meeting where David's plan was presented, and while it has some merits, it was never requested.
Right, but I'm just trying to understand in terms of the stuff that we've seen today that was presented into the process, and how has that been incorporated? Has any of it been incorporated into what work's been done, or is this the kind of first step of that?
No, David and the team presented their views. In some cases, elements that had already been thought of, i.e. relationship to the town hall, permeability through the block, were already considered. But at no stage did we ask them to design the site. And in any case, the issue there, I would suggest respectfully, is that whoever's going to pay for it will actually have the greatest say in development, along with the regulator who determines whether it's acceptable to the city or not.
Okay.
Glenn and then Jimmy.
Oh, sorry, could I just... And given that the development agreement for the Peterborough Quarter is coming to council for approval, are we able to make changes when it's presented to us, given that that's a democratic process we have in place?
So I'm not as close to this as others, but I would believe that if it's coming to council for approval, you're going to have that ability to make comment on it and make changes to it. The process after that on how it goes back to DCL, etc., I'm not au fait with. Looking across the room at those that might be closer, but yeah, I need to take that on notice, I'm sorry.
I'm just trying to understand whether it would be more appropriate, like the concerns around height, if we address those through the development agreement that's going to come to us, or through the amendments that have been put today.
Yeah. So, if you wish to address that matter, because the first question is, do you want to do that? You've got both opportunities. Which one's the best? I can't advise you. That it really comes down to a matter of where you feel most comfortable that you're going to have the most control over. Both of them are effectively council as a landowner in this case, and as the ultimate owner of DCL in the second case, using its ability to control that process. You've got this one before you. It's probably best to at least consider it while it's before you.
Just the final question I have was in regards to transferring the land now for the Peterborough Quarter. Why do we need to transfer it now ahead of the development agreement? Why wouldn't we wait until the development agreement is agreed before we transfer it?
Yeah. So the essential question that the series of reports that we've done to you has been about capitalising DCL by way of the transfer of land. So the timing is to follow the consideration of the DCL land strategy that Council has done, and also the various reports on how to get the best capitalisation setup of council. So it's in those terms. You can certainly do have that option of delaying it, but it leaves uncertainty, and that uncertainty may affect some of the projects that DCL are delivering, particularly around the New Brighton area. So council needs to balance up whether making a decision now and providing some certainty, or delaying a decision and leaving uncertainty, which you prefer in that circumstance.
Okay, Glenn?
Thank you. Just curious over what the market at the moment is telling us over height limits and stories, etc. in the CBD. Have you got any information on that, Steve?
In sense of whether there's...
How high are people prepared to go, or...?
The reality of... for successful development, for the private sector to invest their money and put it at risk, they look at a couple of things. One is they look at the financial feasibility of the project, and that is ultimately determined by the demand, i.e. can they actually fill the project. So they're clearly not going to build something that they can't tenant or sell. That said, the cost of the land is a significant input into the cost of a development, and you've got to actually have sufficient gross floor area to recover the cost. So it depends. Typically in a hotel, for example, most hotels, new build hotels, won't work at the height limit we've talked about here, 17 metres. So it really just depends on the financial feasibility, whether you already own the land, what the input price was for the land. So if you already owned it and the cost of acquisition had been low, feasibility might work. But ultimately, this is an issue of a couple of things. It's an issue of confidence. It's an issue of the ability to make the financial feasibility work. And there are, look, if I can just use hotels as an example, I can give you a list of proposed hotels being built in the city. I can tell you there are only 2 at the moment that are being constructed. So there's a difference between intent and delivery. Thanks.
Jimmy?
One question. Okay, because the particular mentioned earlier, if we approve for this amendment 2, it's high risk for the future the development, and also it's still possible, for the future development, we'll give to the urban design panel for review those one. If we are not approve this one, whether these 2 kind of the paragraph, the urban design panel will consider.
Yeah, so I think there are 2.
Especially like
you want to answer?
I think Carolyn's probably going to be best to address.
The Urban Design Panel only provides advice. It's an advisory body, and it provides advice to the consent process, and the final decision would either be made by the planner or a commissioner, probably in this case a commissioner. So it's only advice into the process.
Yeah, I understand. But whether this is a principle, I just mentioned this the 2 principle the urban design panel will consider. Part of the principle.
When it first went to the panel,
They would consider those.
yep.
They will consider.
They would
the
consider
Urban
them,
Design
yes.
Panel would consider them.
Okay, thank you.
Dion?
My question's to Mr. Clark about the conversation's going about height, and I just want to know quite clearly what the benefit of the going up high means to the actual ground level, and what that will give to the communities around that area and also to the town hall. I mean, yeah, just explain that to me.
If we consider the district plan as of right parameters, which we've discussed the height parameter. What we haven't discussed is the site coverage. Under the district plan, the as of right, so not the maximum, as of right height limit is 17 metres. The as of right site coverage is 100%. So if you actually applied that, you would have a site where there was no permeability through the block, and you would have hard on the street, you'd have facades. The trade-off, I guess, in terms of the height is to say the ground floor area that you give up by not covering the whole site, when you take with height, you create laneways, courtyards, etc. in the development, which give public amenity, but also permeability through the block. One of our challenges in our blocks, and one of the reasons why we've adopted a laneway strategy in other parts of the city, is that standard block size in Christchurch is 200 metres long, and the alternative of going through it is to walk all the way around it, which means that the lines that you would actually transmit people through, corridors that they would normally walk through, they just won't go to. So more ground floor activation, because if you've got laneways, you create greater street frontage effectively. So public amenity, ground activation.
Just very quickly, so under the current, what you guys are proposing, that is what you're proposing for this site?
We're not proposing. We're working with the preferred purchaser, whose initial designs, which councillors have seen, and which the Urban Design Panel has seen, and our colleagues in the council have seen, proposes that in rough order about 50 to 55% site coverage instead of 100%.
Pauline, did you have a question?
Mine's a very quick question to Bruce. That in the share an idea, the feedback from Christchurch residents was loud and clear that they wanted a low-rise city. What level would you put that at? Can you answer that?
Not really an appropriate question. It's council and your role as the representatives that would set those things. Not
Was
an
there
officer.
there was no indication of that number of stories in the sharing
Well,
idea?
there's a city
Do you-
plan that we've developed. Those are the rules.
Sorry, Ian?
It's not a good question to start, but actually share an idea of those things were then picked up and taken into city plan. The city plan provided that provision for current city stories, is it right? But that doesn't mean that you can't have.
Phil?
So, Bruce, can I just clarify, this is really a process question. I think before, in answer to a question, you said, look, the options for us, if we wanted to re-achieve clarity around the permeability part and limited height, was either that we would support that or a return of the development agreement to council. So, with that, if I got you right then, I'm just wondering, I understand there is also an amendment that Yanni has proposed on development agreements coming here, and I just would like us to be able to cite that as the other way of achieving this before we actually vote on this, Ref?
You'd like to?
I'd like to cite the
one first before you do this one.
the amendment that Councillor Johansson has put forward.
Well, you can, but so what it's saying is that will probably supersede the
Is it a second here? I can't, I've moved.
On now, Phil, everyone's pretty much spoken on it. Any other?
So just then, I know there was a gem of a question there. So with the process here, if you do it today, you end up with an encumbrance on the title, which affects the value. If you go through seeking the approval through the development plan when they're brought back, you don't have that encumbrance at this stage, and so therefore it doesn't affect the value at this stage. But there is still that possibility that you may choose to decide once you saw the development plan to encumber those titles. So effectively you may only be deferring that impact, but we can't prejudge what you might say once you get those development plans at a later stage.
Yeah, thank you.
Andrew?
I'm assuming we've finished questions and moving into debate now.
Are we finished questions? Okay, debate.
Okay, I understand the concerns around height, shade, shadow, sunlight and warmth. Probably a poignant time to be having this debate as we come into the 6 darkest weeks of the winter. However, this isn't the opportunity to relitigate the RMA, and it isn't the opportunity to relitigate our district plan. This isn't the opportunity to wish that planning legislation and requirements were actually different than what they are. But this is our opportunity, and I think particularly on this amendment, this is our opportunity to show support to DCL and to show confidence in them and in what they've been set up to do. There's nothing different about this land than any other land in the same zone. And there's nothing different about this developer than any other developer that would be developing this site or any of the neighbouring sites in the same zone in terms of the planning regulations and what those planning regulations would allow and what the developer could do. However, there's a big difference between this development proposal, the amount of work that's been done, the public realm outcomes, site coverage, public amenity, and it's a site, as we've heard, that would allow for 100% site coverage. Here, we've got permeability, we've got public realm that isn't guaranteed by any other development or any other developer on this site that might be proposed. And that's not to mention economic outcomes, the relationship with the town hall, confidence in DCL, confidence in council as decision makers. I believe that to pass this today would totally erode that confidence, not only in relation to this development, but to other potential dealings that third parties might have with DCL or with council. It would see this development dead in the water. I think there's a chance that this could actually see DCL dead in the water if we pass this today. So we need to show confidence in the proposal. We need to show confidence in DCL. I'm not willing to squander all the work that these guys have done, all of the reputation and all of the positive development outcomes over something that's essentially a planning matter over which we would have no influence on any other piece of land. Why we would want to encumber our own land to make it a less favourable development proposition than any other neighbouring land, and at the same time, as we've heard, kill a perfectly good development opportunity with good public outcomes in a key strategic central city location, is totally beyond me, and I definitely won't be supporting it.
Anyone else? Anne?
I'd like to completely endorse everything that Andrew's just said. Somewhere I've read, and I'm not sure whose it is, but it says one team making it happen with integrity and passion. And that's what this is about. We are one team. I just feel a bit sick, actually, that we're putting these poor guys through this again. We have given them permission to do this work, and we have to communicate confidence in them, and I don't believe that this is fair or that it shows integrity. So I completely support what Rob and his team are doing. I think it's fantastic for the city, and I think we're very fortunate to have them, and I would like to support them in any way I can.
Thank you, that's refreshing to hear. Vicky?
I appreciate that this won't go through, but let me tell you what the difference in this chunk of land is across from any other chunk of land that is in the city. We own this land. The public of Christchurch own this land. For us to say we don't care whether there is a 10-storey, 12-storey, 14-storey building on this land is completely wrong. And that's effectively what we're doing unless we create something in our transfer of land to DCL that we are saying you can go as high as you like. You just heard from the planning people that the height restriction of 7 stories, 4 stories can be gone way beyond, and there is no notification. So nobody, not the Victoria Neighbourhood Association, not ICON, not the Peterborough people, not MOA, none of the public of Christchurch will have a say in the height of this development unless we do something, and I don't mind what it is, in terms of limiting the height of this development at this stage. What we want to achieve, this has got nothing to do with who's doing the development, this has got to do with the transfer of public land. And normally, when we transfer public land, we are very clear about the outcome that we want from that. I don't want, and I'm very clear that I don't want, a very high building right opposite the town hall that puts the town hall into shade and cold, because that's not the sort of city I want for the central city of Christchurch. I want a place that feels great for people to live in. I really liked the development, the concept plans that David Shepherd came up with. I thought that sort of permeability, the scale, and the 4, 5, maybe 6-storey buildings, absolutely fine. But what we are doing is giving carte blanche to go as high as you like, and Steve's just mentioned that the trade-off for the public space on the ground is the height of the building. I don't know how high because we haven't been told. So I don't like giving anybody carte blanche with public land. Therefore, I would like some encumbrance. I appreciate this isn't going to go through, but believe me, there is no way that if we don't put some encumbrance on this, that we have any restriction whatsoever on the creation of a very high building directly opposite the living room of the Christchurch. So I think we are silly not to pass this, but if that's the will of the council, so be it.
Jamie?
Look, most of the support for DCL and not supporting this amendment has been said. The only things I'll add to that is that I just wanted to refute what Vicky said there about saying that it's potentially sending a signal that we don't care. You know, I beg to differ with that. I think the fact that we have DCL, our own development agency, working hand in glove with a developer that's going to be adding tremendous value to the development and regeneration fabric of the city speaks volumes that we do care. That's why we have DCL, that's why we are doing this with them. And if you didn't know this anyway, and I suspect you already did, but if not, it's been confirmed by our own staff, supporting this amendment risks this positive development falling over on the whole. It risks DCL falling over on the whole, and you certainly take millions of dollars away from our own ratepayers because it erodes the value of this. So those are three very good reasons why I think you don't support this amendment. And just to reiterate that we do care, that's why DCL exists and why DCL is working so closely with this developer to create something that's quite special for the city.
Thank you. Jimmy?
I'm not supporting the amendment. The reason is based on staff and DCL response. All these criteria under the district plan, under the RMA, the urban design panel, they will consider this only part of them. We have so the kind of comprehensive restricted the district plan and the RMA. So this if we amend it, actually, it's a risk for the future, the development, especially. This opportunity is not always we have, because we have a kind of earthquake, huge earthquake, so give us opportunity. But if we are not grasp this opportunity will be gone. So we need to consider this one. Another one, I go with the Andrew particular mention, confidence and the trust. We need the trust, because this staff, they should have the skills and the knowledge, they have can dealing with all kind of the situation. But as a governance role, we give them proper direction regarding to the regulation, regarding to act. They're the business, not all the business. So based on this kind of situation, difficult to support this amendment.
Thank you. Anyone else? Phil?
Mine is just really a point of process or point of order. Like, I think that it's good that DCL are here to answer the questions, but I think when we come to have the debate, and particularly the voting, that they should be back from the table, so to speak. So I'm just asking that happen in terms of good process.
Yep, thanks for pointing that out. Yanni?
Thank you. It's interesting, I think, to reflect on how we got to this point, and there was a lot of concern expressed when we were talking about the idea of a development agency being established. And one of the key principles that we agreed to on the basis that we would establish it was transparency, so that our community could actually understand what was going on. And unfortunately, we don't have that. Like, we had this discussion when we had this whole land strategy and these requests to go out for these sites, and you'll recall the debate. Some of us wanted the actual proposals to be part of that, so that the community who were making submissions could see what was being proposed. I think it's incredibly difficult for a community to make submissions on something without actually knowing what the proposed outcome is. And that's at the heart of really what I think this amendment is trying to address, is that this is the only time we've heard from our community over what they want on that site. And if we don't agree to this amendment, then how else do we ever do that as locally elected representatives? We don't get any other chance, as I see it, other than the development agreement. And so whether we do that as part of the development agreement at the end, or we do it now, I think the issue of height does need to be considered based on the submissions we've had. You could ask how many changes have been made as a result of the submissions that we've heard on these proposals. Almost none that I can see. So it does seem to me that we do need to think better about how these processes can work so that the community can be informed, so we get transparency around what's proposed, and we can weigh up what the final outcome will be based on the merits of that for our city. So I think that that this amendment is good in terms of it responds to the community concerns. I would much rather respond to those community concerns now and raise it rather than at the end when the development agreement comes back to council, because I think that would do even more damage if the proposal is for, a 50-metre high-rise and then we go, oh, sorry, no, we don't like that at the end, rather than signalling it now, based on the feedback that we've had. I can say, as a councillor who's represented that area and doesn't anymore, but did for a very long time, that one of the major issues facing the inner city residents groups have been the height limits in the central city. They have spent huge amounts of energy and resource going to the Environment Court over Council's permissive planning in the past to protect height limits in the central city, and the Environment Court actually found in their favour previously. So I think height limits are a very important issue. I'd rather, in good faith, do the work that DCL are doing, actually signal that now as part of an amendment, rather than wait until the development agreement, and that's why I'll be supporting it.
Tim?
Thank you. One team with integrity, and we hear good faith, etc. I mean, I have total respect for DCL. We've got to move forward on this. We've seen the scoping plans, or whatever you want to call them. I think if we're going to allow true development, we've got to give these guys the ability to go forward. If we don't, and we have a stick to the height level, we could have a 4-storey block with no vision, no passion, no amenities. It would just be horrid. So I think we've got to give these guys a chance. There's no question. We've agreed for them to go forward. We just keep cutting them off at the pass. It's ridiculous. We're micromanaging. I think we let them go for it. So thank you.
Glenn, then Mike.
Thank you. I hope it's not lost on any of us what our district plan rules actually do permit. And I'm sure we're all staggered at some of the things we see in our neighbourhoods, and we go to our resource consent guys and we say, how to get that get there? Actually, it meets the rules. And often they do. We may not want them there. I can think of a few things in my neighbourhood. How on earth? No, they met the rules. I can think of a situation where the local MP and I were called into moving houses into a subdivision. It was actually about a covenant there. But the rules are so permissive these days that the notification rules are relaxed, not by us, by the government. They've been increasingly relaxed over time. There's a lot that's out of our control. Really? Is this a big deal? It depends. I respect Vicky and Yanni's view on this, but if I'm thinking of the big picture, we have to get the whole thing going. I support it.
Mike?
Thank you. I think of everything we've discussed today and moved, this would probably be the easiest decision to make, and I will not be supporting it. Quite frankly, I think this is crazy to do this, and actually a 4-storey block would probably be the best outcome you could get. I would say nothing would happen there, and it would just be an empty lot for a long, long time. We really need to make some development happen in Christchurch, and this is a really good start using some of the land that we do have. So I will not be supporting this amendment.
Okay. I will put the motion. All in favour say aye. Against? No. Okay, that's a lost. Yep, so who supported that? It's probably a bit quicker. So Yanni, Vicky and Phil and Pauline, and the rest were against. Okay, next amendment. Right, do we have a mover for this one?
Yeah, my mover vanished to another amendment. That was Pauline. So I'd like to become the mover, and I've invited Jimmy to become the seconder, but I don't know whether he's taken up the invitation yet. Jimmy, are you?
Comment. Because based on staff, the DCO response, they provide temporary one. Am I right?
Do that. Okay, so Glenn is moving this. Is anyone seconding it? Well, does anybody want to second the motion? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so you happy to withdraw that?
No seconder? Okay, all right.
Okay. But I would say, I mean, the feedback is quite clear. People want to talk about that. Okay, Amendment 5. Moved by Yanni. Is there a seconder for that? Okay, so there's no seconder for that. Yanni, are you happy to withdraw that for lack of a seconder?
So can I just be...
Hold on, can I just deal with this amendment? Is there a seconder for this amendment? No.
Can I ask a question about that amendment?
So it's lapsed for want of a seconder.
As I understood what we passed yesterday, why is that in there?
This amendment has lapsed for want of a seconder. Okay, thank you. Right, so we've done that. Are we now ready to go to the substantive? We are.
So could I ask a
What's that?
So as I understand what we passed, the development agreement must come back anyway.
We're in public session and that was in PX, so that's a question for later.
Well, this isn't right.
Yes, but not what we discussed yesterday. So
it's
coming to council,
next week's
whatever.
council
So.
meeting. So that's not even it.
So, through the chair, just given that you approved Amendment 1, then clause H of the recommendation probably is no longer required.
Okay. Okay. Are we ready there? Okay, so we're back to the original resolution, which was moved by Dave, seconded by Tim. No more questions. We're in debate. Does anybody wish to debate this? Has anyone got anything left to say?
Can I make a point of order? Look,
Debate.
can I make a point of order, please? Look, I think if a member asks for explanation or clarification, that he or she should be entitled to do so. So I'm really questioning that Councillor Swiggs here not be able to ask a question.
Well, we're in debate.
Yes, because of the different element passed on.
That's okay, you can say that in your piece.
We've actually just removed H from there.
Because apparently amendment, the first...
Are we sure that the amendment will not have an increase in rates? Because I thought there was still another 0.04. I want to make sure that if we're going to remove H, that there is no increase on rates because of this resolution.
Yeah, good point.
So Bruce, what's your...
Yeah, that's a good point.
So with that in mind, because that question was asked, I'm also going to repeat my request for Councillor Swiggs to be able to ask his question, please.
Fine, ask it.
Okay, now I'm just concerned about the rates for these properties. So if we've taken away all of the income from DCL, they're going to be now paying, and we're transferring this land, they're going to be paying rates to us. So there's an added income.
It's the net
revenue.
But what about the other two pieces of land? So I just want to know what that impact is going to have for DCL and to us as a...
Yeah, so we talked a bit about the Peterborough Quarter site, and there is a minimal impact. I think the net was around $5,000. And Patricia is getting the exact numbers. And Beresford Street, it's a very, very minor amount.
So the current rates cost for Peterborough Quarter, that's all the sites, is 86,000 of rates.
So that's actually more than...
Yes. That's why there was a small saving to council from transferring Peterborough Quarter and Beresford Street. Beresford Street has a rates cost of 11,000, so at present we charge ourselves rates. We sell the properties, we get the rates.
Okay.
So can I just check, there was a question about whether this stays...
Yes, did you want H to stay, Bruce, after hearing that?
Sorry, I missed the
Should we
question.
keep H in there? even
I
though
think, given the point, and I missed that, so thank
it
you
just
for
kind
coming
of
out, so keep it in.
makes it clear. Yeah.
So we'll still have to find a way of getting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Are we ready to debate this? Okay. You may.
Can you just put the, if you scroll back up to the top, is it possible to put the land parcels separate? Some of us may wish to vote for some and not for others.
Can we do that? I think it defeats the object.
You effectively have to copy those out.
Because in terms of the consultation, yeah, we consulted on the package.
We've been out and consulted on packages.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've consulted on the package, so we're going to put them all together.
I reserve my right to speak to the debate.
Okay. Are we ready? Who'd like to go first? Yanni? Yes. Yanni?
Okay, well, I mean, a lot's been said already, so I think just to say that I would have supported Beresford Street, but obviously I've been advised that it's a package, so I'll go through my reasons for not supporting. The Peterborough one, I think we're getting the development agreement coming to council anyway, so I can't see any sense in transferring the land now until we get that development agreement, and to me it doesn't make sense to do it until we know what the outcome is, and I've made that point in the previous debate around the amendment. The Milton Street one, again, we're going through a process with City Care at the moment, and until that's concluded, I just think it's short-sighted to be transferring that land. When you think about it, we've actually lost a huge amount of public land close proximity to the central city. So depending on what we get to with our Section 17A reviews, and where we get to in terms of the future of how we do maintenance and how we do a number of things as a council, I think it is premature to dispose of this land and transfer it across to DCL. It may be in future when there is no need for it, then that's a time to have that conversation. But I also take on board the point that was made, and it's a shame that the Mayor's not here, because I'd like to sort of paraphrase one of her quotes, which I totally agree with, and that is that the greenest building is the building that's still standing. And what we heard from submitters to this process was that we've got plenty of council land that's sitting there empty, vacant, nothing happening on, and that should be a focus rather than an existing site where we've currently got activity. So Brougham Street, but even think about the exemplars and what's not happening with those. And so I think let's sort those lands out first before we embark on this new process for a piece of land that currently has a use and has so much uncertainty about what that future use may be in terms of how we deliver services. So I won't support that one. It is a considerable piece of land, and I think it is the major part of this package. In terms of number 3, I think it's good that we've heard that there's an acknowledgement that there's more work to be done with the community. That was in terms of Beresford Street. So I mean, obviously I'm not supporting the whole thing, but if there was one I would support, it would have been that, because I do think one of the things we asked DCL to do was around that whole issue of New Brighton, and that has something that's come through the submissions to deal with the car parking, but also see what those outcomes are. And I guess in conclusion, I'd say that when we agreed to set up DCL, that's what we wanted. We wanted some small projects to be done, and then to see how they worked, and to look at the learnings from that, and to look at the success of those smaller projects before we got into this big idea of doing big, massive developments. And in some ways, I feel like let's get those quick wins, those early ideas adopted and done first before we get into the bigger, more grand scheme of things. It is costing us a huge amount of money and time going through these processes. Unfortunately for me, I just don't support this, because we haven't had the proposal, the outcome, as has been said, that shows clearly what's proposed on these sites. We have a huge amount of uncertainty, and for our community, I think these are public assets, public land. Until we get that certainty and outcome, I don't think we can have a fair, honest, transparent conversation with our community, so I won't be supporting it.
Dion?
I will be supporting the opportunity that we have presented to us today, and I think we've got to remember that this is just about the transfer of land to capitalise Development Christchurch. But it's in their name, Development Christchurch, and I think we're at a point in this recovery that we need to start developing the city and actually giving confidence to the markets outside of New Zealand, or outside of Christchurch and outside of New Zealand potentially, to say, hey, look, we're ready to go. We're ready to rock and roll. Well, we've done a bit of rock and rolling, but we're actually about now, sitting down and actually getting on with this rebuild. It's a bit of a shame that we didn't, in my opinion, debate and talk about the City of Opportunity, realising our potential, the Christchurch Economic Development Strategy today, because that actually sums up perfectly what we're doing. And that document says we need to show leadership in our economy to move our city forward. And if we want to be a diverse economy that actually provides opportunities for everybody, we need to be looking at these opportunities. And one of the key elements of that strategy is a city that takes risk. We can't sit here and not take risk and actually expect the city to recover. So I think we need to take risk, calculated risk, but actually we've got the back. We need to back these organisations and give them the trust so that they can get on and do the job. Otherwise, we're just going to sit there and have empty car park lots that look like ugly things for the rest of our sort of recovery, and that's not going to stimulate the mental health of our city, the growth of our city, the jobs that we want, and facilitate the extra 72,000 jobs that have been what's the word I'm looking for, that have been identified that will come into our local economy in 15 years' time. So this is a future-proof in our city, and this is why we'll support this. It's about thinking bigger picture, and this is the first step of actually getting on that journey.
Thank you, Dion. Anne?
Yep, Council's vision is for Christchurch as a city of opportunity, open to new ideas, new people and new ways of doing things, a city where anything is possible. So we want a prosperous economy, we want a livable city, and we want strong communities, and I think that DCL is leading the way with this.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I'm happy to support this afternoon. The number of issues that have been raised have largely been debated as we have gone through the amendments, and I appreciate it's been a long and at times tortuous debate, but I think it's been worthwhile. There are aspects of this conversation, I think, that have needed to be had for some time, quite possibly not least at the time that DCL was established, quite possibly at times when we've had discussions around various statements of intent that have been approved, and noting that we've got a statement of intent which is currently in process, and the development agreement matter is one that quite possibly can land in that statement of intent conversation. But the Peterborough Quarter was certainly an interesting debate around the planning restrictions and the planning abilities and so on, but that some of that can land, I think, in the SOI approval process around the approvals and so on. In New Brighton, we've got the opportunity for a joined-up development. We've got a recovery opportunity, a regeneration opportunity. As a council, we're considering further significant investment into New Brighton through our annual plan process, and we've also had significant discussion about needing a joined-up process that allows for development of the New Brighton core at the same time as we look at investment into the hot saltwater pools and so on. So the transfer that we've considered this afternoon, that we're considering this afternoon, allows for the sort of interventions that need to happen to make New Brighton work. A number of studies have been done on New Brighton. We've heard from submitters this afternoon that what we need is more people living there. We need more people that live there using local businesses, been able to use local businesses. Concerns have been raised around parking. I've got every confidence that the parking issue will be dealt with by way of the other work that DCL is doing and by robust community engagement. I've got every confidence that DCL will do that. The Mill Street depot, the Milton Street site, where City Care operate from is actually a matter for City Care, and we've heard their response to this particular issue. There are plenty of reasons why on that site we would look at a comprehensive development that's got the ability to regenerate and revitalise that whole area, quite possibly, and we'll have achieved that by way of the, or we may possibly achieve that by way of the amendment that was passed this afternoon, looking beyond the confines of this particular proposal and this particular site to take in other opportunities for good social outcomes as well. So it's been a good debate. And I think it's great that people have had the opportunity to put out exactly what their concerns might be with these various projects, with the land transfer, with DCL's way of working, in fact, at times. But I'd like to think the decision we're about to make now is one that shows our confidence in DCL, one that shows our confidence in the way that DCL have been set up and the work that they're doing, and as has been said earlier in debate or maybe informally, that allows DCL to be capitalised and to get on with the work that we set them up to do.
Jimmy?
The Christchurch, the earthquake recovery, we are all aware. The moment we enter into the final stage of the earthquake recovery, that's a regeneration of the Christchurch. So the timing, I think, is very important. And also the council established the DCL. We all prefer the DCL is more functioning, and to prefer is a kind of strong mechanism can contribute to this regeneration. That's very important. Another one, you will review the DCL, the kind of the statement of intent. They support the council and the CCHL, the vision, and also contribute to the council outcome, like and she mentioned earlier, social, economic well-being, etc. So we need to give them more kind of the resources in order to be the more functional contributor to this regeneration. And also based on today's discussion, at least we under control the rates, because the annual plan we particularly mentioned our rates keep not up to the 5.5%, not over that. So based on today, the kind of recommendation, we can achieve this goal, no any problem. And also, like I mentioned earlier, because opportunity and risk, we need to kind of consider if we are not grasp opportunity and this opportunity lost. And also today we just keep, based on the other kind of function, like a discipline, resource management act, they have their function. And also we trust the staff in DCL, they have the skill, they have the knowledge, they have capacity, they can make the better. But we just, to trust in them, that I think that's most important. So generally speaking, I support this recommendation.
Sarah?
Thank you. I am in favour of this, and I'd like to just bring one small new thing to the table. I did vote against the Peterborough amendment, even though I do have concerns about that particular development and the community input into it. But I didn't think it was for us to put an encumbrance on or to restrict the site development itself. I do have concerns about community input, and I couldn't put a further amendment because I'd already seconded the first one. But I would like to think that any development company who was acting on our behalf, knowing how we feel about community input into developments in our neighbourhoods and into our city, might proactively notify any developments, which they're able to do. You don't have to wait for someone else to decide whether you have to notify or not. You can actually proactively decide to notify. And I would like to think that development companies working on our behalf would like to actively seek community input in that way. Thank you.
Glenn and Pauline.
Thank you. Andrew stole one of my words before. That's intervention. Absolutely fine with that. In my view, this isn't the time for BAU. So if you're in the east of Christchurch, the question is, what is the council going to do for Christchurch? They're looking for leadership. You might have questions over whether or not the business and landowners acted. That's it. But sooner or later, someone has to intervene. And I think someone has to intervene in the whole city. It's not time for BAU, which, and you might have a go at me for this, I think the government has done over things like housing, where they never intervened. They said, let the market take care of it. Well, it did. People need houses. The community needs intervention. They need leadership from us, I'm happy to go with this. The four parts of the statement of intent are in line with the four well-beings of the LGA. This passes the procurement policy, which I promoted, which does permit an exclusive offer. There is sufficient breadth for that in the policy. I'm happy with this. I hope you will support it. As I said, it's not time for BAU. We actually have to show leadership. This must feel like being at the bottom of a ruck every time DCL come along, so I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it will lessen. But you're our company, we've set you up, and we actually have to let them fly. So I hope you'll support it.
Thank you, Glenn. Pauline?
I'll be quick. Look, I don't believe in apologising for good debate, and I agree with Andrew that it's been good debate this afternoon. Where I'm coming from, I'm disappointed in the Peterborough Quarter proposal because, you know, I really value the share an idea opinion that came through that we did want a low-rise city, and we do have our town hall that is being restored, and I think that will be put at risk of being cast into shadow. However, this is a package. I want to see us go forward, like the expressions that's been stated around the table today. So I will support this.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you. I just want to mention, you know, like someone mentioned before about Bram Street, you know, having lots of council land for available for lease. Let's look at Bram Street, for instance. Literally just a few metres away from a 4-lane highway. They were cold in winter, hot in summer, they leaked, and they were full of wonderful people with huge value. What is that message sending to people of Christchurch? I really look forward to Milton Street being developed by DCL. I think the potential there and that site, linking in with Sydenham Park, is absolutely priceless, and I'm totally supportive of it. With regards to Peterborough, you know, we've got to just go for it. We've sent a very clear message time and time again to DCL. They are fully aware of what our aspirations are, what our values are. They're the same values these guys have. You know, we are one team working together for the betterment of our city. So I'm totally in support of this. That's why I seconded it, and I will second it again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Anyone else? Dave? Okay, well, you can go last then. Aaron?
Yeah, I'll obviously support this. I support the bold developments that have been brought to the table in the way back game that we're going about it. Too often do we hear that the council sits on its hands and doesn't do enough in this field, and some will criticise it, so be it. I don't believe, unlike Councillor Chen, I don't believe we're in the final stage of recovery. I biked around the city at lunchtime today and there was many an empty block. So if that's the final stage, boy, it's a big final we've got coming. And I didn't vote for the First Amendment we did around Milton Street because of my fears around that may increase the cost. One of our goals of that site to have some affordable housing and some social housing placed in there, because there was a small amount of working capital attached to it, which they will now loan that money to do the development, and then that will get passed on to the end users. So you might save with one hand, but you take it away with the other. So that was my point there. I do agree with Yanni on one point, and that is that there should probably be more properties in this. He did list a few of them, and so we should be putting together another list in an amount of time that will hopefully go to DCL as well for some other bold developments, which brings me to my final one. That presentation we saw of the Peterborough Quarter, if that comes off with those laneways and the size of and the scale of those smaller shops at the ground level they were talking about, I'll be really, really proud of that. I'm not saying exactly what it is. I think, didn't someone say before you could walk through and things?
Yeah, you can carry on. Sorry.
Okay, I don't know. My storytelling might be good, but it's not painting that good a picture, I'm sure, because most of my colleagues look bored already. But it will be a great development. As I biked around the city today, I noticed the number of large footprint retail sites in the inner city. I'm not going to name them all, which streets were incredibly boring, but they do exist and they're our main ones. So go and have a look. The footprints are massive, and most of them are banks or selling cell phones. I've already got a bank and I've already got a cell phone, so I don't need an inner city at the moment because there's nothing there for me. The other shops, all those little cool ones, haven't arrived yet, and hopefully I'd like to see the list. I'll give you a small post-it note. Cool.
Thank you, Aaron.
That's it.
Okay. Anyone else apart from Dave? Okay, Dave, you can finish it off.
Thank you. Look, I'm very proud to be able to propose this motion, and I think back when DCL was proposed and set up, it's that long ago I can't actually remember when it was. But since that time we've debated a whole lot of issues. But from memory, going back there, we set up DCL as a place for investors to land their ideas on the city, an operation that could operate at arm's length from the council, avoiding many of the delays and bureaucracy that's encountered within council, and effectively to be able to operate in the private sector. The proposal that we have before us today is to approve property transfers to capitalise DCL, allowing them to implement the various development plans across the city. And what we've seen so far for the Peterborough Quarter, Milton Street and New Brighton, and I'm sure in the future there will be many more. We need to have confidence in DCL and not micromanage all their proposals, and really I think that if we have concerns about the way that DCL may operate, they should be addressed in a review of the statement of intent, and effectively letting DCL get on with things. I'd like to just finish today. Earlier today we had a number of deputations, and we had one personal from the New Brighton area, and we had one from Dr. John Cook, who is the local medical practitioner for New Brighton, whose practice sees, I would say, the vast majority of people that live in that area. And I'd just like to read the last, to elaborate a wee bit further. We've had some concerns expressed today about car parking in New Brighton, and the car park, in fact, is across the road from his practice. So I'd just like to read quickly the last 3 paragraphs of the letter that he submitted to us today. I understand that DCL needs to have a capital base for it to operate effectively as a suburban stimulating entity. On this basis, the transfers of those properties detailed for the capital base for DCL to effectively operate is to be encouraged and acted upon. As an individual with limited understanding of local government and financing, I can only see the upside in promoting the community development through DCL, and in the medium to long term this will increase the rate take from New Brighton, and I'll take the liberty of adding and the city, and give the council further ability to enhance the environment for the betterment of its citizens. So that for me sort of encapsulates the thoughts of a leader in the New Brighton community, and I think reflects what I believe is the attitude that we should be prevailing in terms of capitalising DCL, and I have great pleasure in promoting it, and I urge other members to support this remit.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, well I will put the motion. Do we have to put the 2 separate bits? Because it's, okay, so I'm going to put basically A to I. I'll put that motion. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. That's carried. Just note Yanni. And then I'll put items J and K, which don't include the CCHL directors. We'll stand back. I'll put items J and K. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? That's carried.
So that you're just not clicking any of us.
Yes.
Yes, we'll just close the meeting.
Okay, thanks everyone. It's been a long day, but good discussions and a good outcome. I now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.